At Riverside High School, lunch was never just about eating. It was a show. Every day, students lined up with their fancy meals, laughing and showing off the latest food trends. Sushi rolls, gourmet burgers, and colorful smoothies filled the tables. Everyone tried to impress their friends, hoping to get a few admiring looks. In the middle of all this excitement sat Ely, a quiet teen who didn't seem to care about any of it. He always brought the same thing for lunch: a plain brown bag that held a peanut butter sandwich, a red apple, and a bottle of water, while others pulled out shiny lunchboxes or brown paper bags filled with expensive snacks. Ely quietly unwrapped his sandwich without making a fuss. He usually sat by himself at the far end of the cafeteria. It wasn't that he didn't want friends. He just didn't fit into any of the loud groups. He didn't wear designer sneakers. He didn't flash the newest phone. He didn't brag about weekend trips or expensive gifts. Ely simply enjoyed his food, kept his head down, and minded his own business. But things started to change one Tuesday afternoon. A few kids noticed his simple lunch and started whispering. One boy, wearing a bright blue hoodie, pointed at Ely and chuckled. "Look at that old sandwich," he said loudly enough for a few tables to hear. A girl with long braids giggled and added, "Does he even know what real food looks like?" Soon more students joined in. They made jokes, pretending to hold their noses as they passed by Ely's table. Some took pictures and shared them with snarky comments online. Ely heard them, of course, but he didn't show any reaction. He just took another bite of the sandwich and stared at the floor. Deep down, though, it stung. Ely wondered why something as small as his lunch made him a target. He hadn't done anything wrong. He wasn't trying to be different. He just liked simple things. But at Riverside High, being different was enough to make you stand out, and not in a good way. After lunch that day, whispers followed Ely down the hallway. Groups of students nudged each other and laughed when he walked by. Some even made fake gagging noises. No teacher seemed to notice, and Ely didn't know how to explain it without making things worse. Ellie kept thinking about his mom that morning, handing him his lunch with a warm smile. She always told him that it wasn't the outside that mattered, it was what was inside that counted. He tried to hold on to that thought, even as the world around him seemed to say otherwise. He promised himself he would just get through the week. Maybe, just maybe, if he stayed quiet enough, they would get bored and move on. But Ely had no idea that something unexpected was about to happen. Something that would change everything. By the next day, the teasing had only gotten worse. Ely walked into the cafeteria, his heart sinking a little as he looked for his usual spot. The chatter around him was louder than usual, filled with laughter and the clatter of trays. He tried to ignore it, but as he passed by a few tables, he overheard some familiar voices. "Hey, Eli, did you bring your lunch from the last century?" One boy teased, laughing with his friends. "Are you saving the world one peanut butter sandwich at a time?" Eli kept his eyes on the ground, hoping the teasing would stop. He quickly made his way to the back of the cafeteria, where he usually sat by himself. The spot was quiet, away from the popular groups, but he felt the weight of their stares on him. As he sat down, a group of girls at the nearby table turned to look. They whispered and giggled behind their hands, casting glances at him between bites of their fancy lunches. "I can't believe he actually eats that every day," one of them whispered loud enough for Ely to hear. "Maybe he doesn't have enough money for anything else," another girl chimed in. "Poor guy. He should at least try a salad or something." Ely didn't respond. He simply opened his brown paper bag and began to unwrap his sandwich, trying to ignore the harsh words. He took a deep breath and reminded himself what his mom always said. "It's not about what you have, it's about who you are." But today, that advice didn't seem to help. His lunch felt like the loudest thing in the room, drawing more attention than it ever had before. Ely's stomach twisted as he picked up his apple and took a bite, wishing the floor would swallow him whole. It was hard to focus on anything else when everyone seemed to be watching, judging, and making fun of him. He glanced over at the students who had been laughing at him the day before. They were still talking and looking his way, but this time, their whispers felt louder, sharper. One of the boys from earlier, dressed in a bright hoodie and jeans, snickered when he saw Ely looking over. "Hey, Eli, you want some of my fries? I'm sure you've never tasted anything so good," he said. his voice dripping with sarcasm. Ellie didn't say anything. He didn't want to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. He had learned that the more you ignored people like that, the sooner they get bored and move on to something else. But for some reason, this time the teasing didn't stop. It felt like it was only getting worse. As the bell rang to signal the end of lunch, Ely grabbed his tray and stood up quickly. He couldn't wait to leave the cafeteria, to get away from the laughter, the stares, and the whispers. He knew it was just another day in the world of high school, but today it felt different. It felt harder. He walked slowly toward the exit, wishing for the quiet of the hallway and the comfort of his own thoughts. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, but what he didn't know was that change was coming faster than he could imagine. The next day, Ely tried to keep a low profile. He didn't want to face the same teasing from his classmates. As he walked through the hallways, he kept his head down, his eyes fixed on the floor, trying to avoid the groups of students who had been laughing at him. It felt like the whispers were following him everywhere. Even though he wasn't looking directly at anyone, he could feel their stares on his back, like invisible fingers poking at him. He made his way to the cafeteria, his heart heavy in his chest. He wasn't sure what to expect today. Would the teasing get worse? Would someone else say something cruel about his lunch? He just wanted to blend in, to be left alone. When he entered the lunchroom, the noise hit him immediately, laughter, shouting, and the clatter of trays. But today, something was different. The usual groups of students weren't as loud as they had been the day before. The teasing, which had seemed endless, had quieted down. Eli wondered if maybe they were finally getting tired of it. He took his usual seat at the back of the cafeteria, but as he sat down, he noticed something strange. The group of girls who had made fun of his lunch yesterday were sitting at a table near his. They weren't laughing anymore. They weren't whispering. In fact, they weren't talking at all. It was almost like they were avoiding looking his way. Ellie unwrapped his sandwich, wondering what was going on. Had they lost interest in him, or was something else happening? As he took a bite, he heard someone from across the room call out, "Hey, Eli, what's up?" He looked up to see a tall kid, Nate, waving at him. Nate wasn't part of the cool crowd, but he wasn't a target for teasing either. He was one of those kids who just seemed to float between groups, never getting picked on and never really fitting in anywhere. Ella raised an eyebrow. Hey, he said, unsure of what to do. Nate didn't usually talk to him, and certainly not in front of everyone. Nate smiled and walked over, carrying a tray with a giant burger and a milkshake. "You sitting here?" he asked, pointing to the empty seat across from Ely. Ely nodded, not sure if he should be confused or relieved. Nate sat down and took a big bite of his burger. "So, how's your day going?" he asked between chews. Ellis stared at him for a second. Why was Nate talking to him? He didn't mind, but it was odd. Okay, I guess," Ella replied. Nate shrugged. "Cool. I just wanted to say, I noticed what happened yesterday. Don't let those guys get to you. I've seen it before. They pick on anyone who's different." Ely was taken aback. It wasn't like Nate was best friends with him, but hearing someone speak up felt like a breath of fresh air. For the first time in days, Ely didn't feel so alone. "Thanks," Ellie muttered, feeling a bit awkward. Nate gave him a reassuring smile. "Don't worry about it. You've got to stay true to yourself. Who cares about a sandwich anyway?" Ellie smiled, grateful for the support. For once, it felt like maybe things weren't so bad. But as he looked around the cafeteria, he still felt the weight of those stares. However, there was something in Nate's words that stuck with him. Maybe he didn't have to let others control how he felt about himself. As the lunch bell rang, Illy stood up, ready to leave. But today, he felt a little lighter. Maybe things would get better. Maybe he didn't have to hide from the world after all. Illy woke up that Friday morning with a strange feeling in his stomach. It wasn't the usual nerves he felt before school. Instead, there was something else, a little spark of hope. He hadn't expected it. But after Nate had spoken up in the cafeteria yesterday, he couldn't stop thinking about it. Maybe it was possible to make it through the day without feeling so judged. When he arrived at school, he noticed that things seemed quieter. The students who usually made a big deal out of every little thing were talking in low voices. No one seemed to be pointing or laughing at anyone. It felt almost like a normal day, but Ely still couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. When lunchtime rolled around, Ely took a deep breath before entering the cafeteria. He was used to the chaos, the loud groups, the teasing, and the whispers. But today, he hoped it would be different. He made his way to his usual spot in the back of the room. But as he passed a few tables, something caught his attention. The group of girls who had made fun of his lunch the day before were sitting together, but they didn't seem to be laughing. They were talking quietly, but this time they didn't look over at him. In fact, it was as if they were deliberately avoiding looking his way. Ellie felt a bit uneasy. He wasn't sure if he should feel relieved or confused. Maybe they'd finally gotten bored of making fun of him, or maybe they had simply moved on to something else. He sat down at his usual spot, unpacked his lunch, and started eating, trying to ignore the silence that had settled over the cafeteria. It was strange not hearing the usual comments or laughter. But as the minutes passed, he realized that it wasn't just quiet, it was peaceful. For the first time in a long time, Healy felt like he could eat without worrying about anyone watching him, judging him. Just as he was starting to relax, the door to the cafeteria opened, and the principal stepped inside, holding the microphone. The chatter slowly quieted down, and all eyes turned toward her. "Good afternoon, students," she said, smiling as she looked around the room. "We have a special announcement today. Someone important is joining us for lunch, and we want to give them a warm welcome." Eli raised an eyebrow, wondering who could be visiting today. The principal didn't often make announcements about guests. She continued, her eyes scanning the room. "Please join me in welcoming Mark Zuckerberg." The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at each other in disbelief. Mark Zuckerberg, the man who created Facebook. Ely couldn't believe it. He had no idea why he was coming to the school, but the atmosphere in the cafeteria shifted completely. Whispers spread through the room like wildfire. Haley glanced around, noticing that the teasing and laughing had completely stopped. Everyone was too focused on the announcement to even think about making fun of anyone. For the first time in a while, Ely felt like he was part of something bigger than just a lunchroom full of high school students. The principal continued, "Mark will be joining one of you for lunch today. So, without further ado, let's welcome him." As the room buzzed with excitement, Ely's heart started beating faster. He wasn't sure why, but he felt like something big was about to happen, something that could change everything. Ellie sat in stunned silence as the announcement settled over the cafeteria. Mark Zuckerberg, the creator of Facebook, was coming to their school. Ely couldn't quite wrap his mind around it. Why would someone like Mark Zuckerberg be at Riverside High of all places? It felt surreal. The principal was still speaking, but the words felt distant to Ely. He was trying to process everything. Students were already buzzing with excitement. Some were already taking out their phones, whispering about how they would get a selfie with him. Others were talking about what they would say if they had a chance to speak with him. But Ely just sat there frozen. His sandwich, which had felt like the most ordinary thing in the world earlier, suddenly seemed incredibly small in comparison to the enormous moment unfolding before him. As the excitement grew, Ely found himself thinking back to the teasing. Just yesterday, kids had made fun of him for his simple lunch, laughing about how it was old-fashioned and boring. Now, here was Mark Zuckerberg, a billionaire, coming to their school, and it felt impossible that this was really happening. Ely couldn't help but wonder what someone like Mark would think about his lunch. Would he laugh too? Would he find it funny or strange? "Everyone, please calm down," the principal's voice echoed through the cafeteria. "Mark will be joining us shortly. Please show him respect, and we will be inviting one of you to share lunch with him. Please don't crowd him." Ely's thoughts were interrupted as the doors to the cafeteria opened again. Mark Zuckerberg walked in, dressed simply in a gray hoodie and jeans, looking just like any other person. There were no bodyguards, no flashy entourage, just him. He smiled warmly at the students who were staring at him in awe. The room went silent once more. Ellie stared at Mark, still in disbelief. The man who had changed the way the world connected was standing in front of him, and it didn't seem real. It was as though time had slowed down. For a moment, no one moved. Even the laughter and noise of the cafeteria seemed to vanish, leaving only Mark's calm presence. Mark walked to the front of the room, and the principal stepped aside, giving him the microphone. "Thank you for the warm welcome," he said, his voice calm but clear. "It's great to be here with you all today." Ely couldn't believe how normal Mark seemed, despite everything he had accomplished. There was no arrogance in his voice, no pride in his posture, just a man who was comfortable in his own skin. He seemed like someone you could talk to, someone who didn't care about status or reputation. "I'm really excited to be here and meet some of you," Mark continued smiling. "I'm looking for someone to have lunch with today, someone who's open to a chat. Anyone interested?" Ely's heart skipped a beat. Was this real? Mark Zuckerberg was going to have lunch with one of them. He looked around, seeing many students nervously raise their hands, but for some reason, Ely couldn't bring himself to raise his hand. What would he say? What could he say to someone like Mark? Then, to Ely's surprise, Mark looked directly at him. "How about you?" Mark asked, his voice clear but friendly. "Eli, right?" Ely's mouth went dry. He couldn't believe it. Mark Zuckerberg was talking to him, asking him to join him for lunch. This wasn't happening. This was impossible. But it was. Ellis stood up slowly, his legs feeling weak, and walked toward the front of the room. Everything around him seemed to blur, but Mark's smile was bright and reassuring. As Ely reached the table, he could hardly believe what was happening. Mark pulled out a chair and motioned for Ely to sit down. "How's it going?" Mark asked, as though they had been friends for years. "Tell me about your day." Ely sat down across from Mark Zuckerberg, his heart racing. He wasn't sure what to say. Just a moment ago, he had been sitting quietly, eating his lunch, trying to avoid the teasing from his classmates. Now he was face to face with one of the most famous people in the world, and it felt like his entire life had flipped upside down. Mark gave him a warm, reassuring smile, as if he understood how overwhelming this moment must have been for Eli. "So, Eli," Mark said, his voice friendly and calm, "what's been going on in your life? What's school like for you?" Eli blinked, still processing everything. He had never expected his day to take such a turn. He could feel the eyes of the entire cafeteria on him, but for some reason, sitting across from Mark made him feel more at ease. Maybe it was the way Mark was looking at him, not like he was some big shot or celebrity, but like he was just a regular person. It's okay," Eli said, his voice a little shaky. "Just, school. Friends. Not much else." Mark nodded. "I get it. Sometimes school can feel like it's all about fitting in, huh?" Ila was surprised by how much Mark understood. "Yeah, it's like everyone has to be the same. And if you're different, people just don't get it." Mark smiled, leaning in slightly. When I was in school, I wasn't exactly the most popular guy either. I didn't really fit in with the crowd. But that's okay. What matters is staying true to who you are. That's something I've always believed in, even when people didn't understand me." Illy's eyes widened. "Really? But you're Mark Zuckerberg. You created Facebook. Everyone knows you. How can you say you didn't fit in?" Mark chuckled softly. "It's funny, isn't it? Sometimes the more successful you become, the more people expect you to be something you're not. But the truth is, I was just like you, trying to figure things out. It wasn't all easy for me. I had to learn to be okay with not fitting in. And once I did that, everything changed." Ely felt his shoulders relax a little. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like the odd one out. He felt like he was talking to someone who really understood what it was like to be different, to be on the outside looking in. "So," Mark continued, "what's something you love doing, aside from school?" Eli thought for a moment. "I like building things, like little projects. I don't really talk about it much, though." Mark's eyes lit up. "That's awesome. What kind of projects?" Eli smiled, a little more comfortable now. "Just small stuff. I built a birdhouse once, and sometimes I try to fix old electronics." Mark nodded thoughtfully. Creating things is one of the best ways to express yourself. You don't have to be famous or popular to build something that matters. Those little projects, they could be the beginning of something big. Just remember, it's about doing what you love." Ely felt a warmth spread through him. Mark's words made him feel like his hobbies were important, even if no one else saw them that way. It was like he was seeing himself in a new light. As they sat there talking, Eli realized something. Maybe he didn't need to fit in with the crowds or worry about what others thought of his lunch. Maybe it was enough to just be himself. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, but Ely didn't want this moment to end. As he stood up, he looked at Mark with a new sense of confidence. "Thanks," Ely said, his voice steady. This really means a lot." Mark smiled. "Anytime, Eli. Just remember, stay true to yourself, no matter what." Ely nodded, feeling like something inside him had shifted. He was ready to face the world, not as someone trying to fit in, but as someone who was okay with being different. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most important thing of all. As the days went by after his lunch with Mark Zuckerberg, Ely couldn't stop thinking about their conversation. He had walked away from that lunch feeling lighter, more confident. It wasn't just about the fact that he had met one of the most famous people in the world. It was about what Mark had said, how important it was to be true to himself, to embrace his own interests and talents, no matter what others thought. Ella began to change in small ways. He started speaking up more in class, not out of a desire to be noticed, but because he realized that his thoughts and opinions mattered. He stopped hiding in the back of the cafeteria, avoiding the kids who had teased him. Instead, he began to sit with a few of the quieter students who seemed just as eager to avoid the chaos of the popular crowd. He also started working on his projects again. The old electronics he had once ignored, thinking they were just junk, suddenly felt like opportunities. He found a broken radio in his garage and spent hours fixing it. It wasn't perfect, but when he turned it on and heard the static clear up into music, it felt like a small victory. Ely's classmates started to notice. Some of them were surprised by the changes. They saw him working on his projects, not hiding in the corners anymore. A few even started asking him about what he was doing. One afternoon, a girl from his class, Sarah, came up to him after school. "Hey, Eli, I saw you working on that old radio. That was cool. How'd you fix it?" Eli was taken aback at first. He wasn't used to people noticing what he was doing, especially not the kids who had ignored him in the past. I just followed some instructions online and, gave it a try. It wasn't that hard." Sarah smiled. "Well, I think it's awesome. I've never tried anything like that. Maybe you could teach me sometime." Ely blinked, unsure if he had heard her right. Someone actually wanted to learn from him. He smiled, feeling a little proud of himself. "Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to show you." From that moment on, things started to feel different for Ely. It wasn't that the teasing and whispers had stopped entirely. There were still a few kids who made snide comments. But now, Ely didn't let it bother him. He knew who he was, and that was enough. One afternoon, as he was walking home from school, Ely saw a group of kids from his class walking ahead of him. They were laughing and joking, but this time he didn't feel the need to avoid them. He wasn't ashamed of who he was anymore. In fact, he was starting to feel proud of the things that made him unique. When he reached the group, one of the boys, Mike, turned and waved at him. Eli had always been a little nervous around Mike. He was one of the kids who used to tease him. But this time, Mike didn't say anything rude. He just gave him a nod. "Hey, Eli, you still working on those projects?" Mike asked casually. Eli felt his stomach do a small flip, but he smiled and nodded. "Yeah, actually, I'm working on a new project now. Fixing up an old computer." "That sounds pretty cool," Mike said. "Maybe you could show me how to do that sometime." Ely blinked in surprise. For a moment, he wasn't sure what to say. The kid who had once laughed at him now wanted to learn from him. It didn't make sense. But then he realized it didn't need to make sense. Things were changing, and that was okay. "Sure," Ella said with a smile. "I'd be happy to." As he continued walking home, Ely couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He wasn't just a quiet kid who sat alone anymore. He was someone with talents, someone who was respected, and most importantly, he was someone who had learned to be proud of who he was. The weeks that followed Mark Zuckerberg's visit were some of the most transformative for Ely. He had found his own voice, and with it came new confidence. He was no longer the quiet kid sitting alone in the cafeteria. Instead, he was the one who was often asked for advice about electronics or given a chance to explain how to fix things that no one else knew how to repair. Ella had even started a small project club after school. It wasn't big, just a handful of students who were interested in fixing old gadgets or building small inventions. At first, only a few of his classmates showed up, but soon more and more kids became curious. Some of them, like Sarah, had never picked up a screwdriver before, but they were willing to try. Others had a little experience, and they came with ideas of their own. Eli didn't mind. He enjoyed teaching them, showing them the simple tricks he had learned over the years. He felt proud when one of the students fixed an old phone or made something work that had been broken for months. The sense of accomplishment in their faces was enough to make everything feel worthwhile. One day, as he was packing up his things after a club meeting, Mike approached him. Eli was surprised. Mike had never been particularly friendly to him in the past, but lately, things had seemed different. "Hey, Eli," Mike said, standing awkwardly by the door. "I was wondering, could you help me with something?" Eli paused for a moment, unsure what to expect. He had never really had a full conversation with Mike outside of schoolwork. "Sure, what's up?" "There's this old guitar in my garage," Mike explained. "It's been broken for a while, and I don't really know how to fix it. I thought maybe you could help me out, since you're good with stuff like that." Eli blinked, trying to process what Mike had just said. Mike, the kid who had once laughed at him for his lunch, now wanted him to help fix a guitar. It was hard to believe, but at the same time, Eli could see the sincerity in Mike's eyes. "Yeah, I can help," Ellis said, feeling a sense of pride swell inside him. "I've never worked on a guitar before, but we can give it a try." Mike smiled, his expression relieved. "Thanks, man. I really appreciate it." As they walked together to Mike's house, Eli couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. It wasn't just about fixing things anymore. It was about the way people were starting to see him, no longer as the kid who was easy to pick on, but as someone with skills and talents that others respected. It felt good to be seen for who he truly was. When they reached Mike's garage, they found the guitar. It was old and dusty, with a few missing strings, but Eli could see potential. He rolled up his sleeves and got to work. Mike watched him closely, asking questions about how the different parts of the guitar worked and what needed to be done. After an hour of work, the guitar was in much better shape. It wasn't perfect, but it sounded better than before. Mike strummed a few chords, smiling in disbelief at how much it had improved. "This is awesome," Mike said, looking at Eli with newfound respect. "I can't believe you fixed it. You're really good at this." Eli smiled back, feeling the warmth spread through him. "Thanks, Mike. It's just what I love doing." As they finished up and prepared to head inside, Eli realized how much he had changed since that day Mark Zuckerberg had come to school. He had gone from being someone who tried to hide his talents to someone who was confident enough to share them with others. He had learned that being true to himself wasn't just about accepting who he was. It was about letting others see it too. And for the first time in a long time, Eli felt like he was exactly where he needed to be.